The sun rose lazily over Mount Aganga, casting its golden rays across the village of Duru. The mountain loomed high, its jagged peaks cloaked in mist, a silent sentinel guarding the people below. For the villagers, Aganga was not just a mountain, it was a protector, a sacred being whose presence was woven into their lives. The elders often said, "Mount Aganga listens, it watches. When we stray, it whispers to the spirits, and they come to remind us of our place." The mountain's rivers, clear and cold, brought life to the fields, and its forests offered shade and abundance. Yet, the villagers knew better than to take from it without offering something in return. Small calabashes of milk and woven trinkets were left at its base, symbols of their gratitude and reverence. In the heart of the village, life moved to a rhythm all its own. The mornings began with the clatter of clay pots and the hum of conversations as women prepared for the day's trade. Children darted through the dusty paths, their laughter mingling with the bleats of goats. As the day wore on, the sounds softened, giving way to the steady thump of drums echoing from the communal square. The drums of Duru were more than instruments. Each beat carried a message, each rhythm a purpose. They spoke of births, deaths, and everything in between. In the evenings, the village gathered around fires to hear tales from the elders. The flickering light played on their faces as they recounted stories of bravery, betrayal, and the ever-watchful spirits of the forests and rivers. The forests that surrounded Duru were alive, or so it was said. The villagers believed they teemed with spirits, some benevolent, others stern protectors of harmony. It was not uncommon for hunters to return with stories of glowing eyes in the darkness or voices that guided them home when they were lost. The rivers, winding and serene, were thought to carry the whispers of ancestors, their songs a reminder to live with humility. Among the many tales told at night, none were as chilling as the story of the Forbidden Drumbeat. It was said that long ago, a drummer named Uluwal, gifted by the spirits themselves, was taught a rhythm so powerful it could summon the ancestors. But the spirits had warned, "This beat is not yours to command. Play it only in times of justice." The villagers leaned in as the elder's voice dropped to a whisper. Uluwal's son, they would say, played the drum out of pride, thinking he could harness the spirits. The earth trembled, and the spirits came, but they did not bless him. They took him, leaving only the echoes of his arrogance. From then on, the Forbidden Drumbeat became a cautionary tale, a reminder that power must be wielded with wisdom. Chief Ogun, the village elder, bore the weight of this history. His deep, lined face often reflected the burden of knowledge he carried. Many knew of his sternness, but few understood its roots. He was the last living witness to the spirit's wrath, a secret he kept close. His voice, steady and commanding, often reminded the villagers, the spirits are not cruel. They are just. Remember this when ambition clouds your heart. Ease, the village's most gifted drummer, had heard these warnings countless times. But in his heart, ambition burned brighter than fear. Why should tradition hold us back? He often asked his younger sister Adama. She, ever the voice of reason, would place a gentle hand on his arm and reply, "Because tradition holds us together, brother." Yet even Adama could see the fire in Easy's eyes, a fire that tradition alone could not extinguish. She worried for him, her love for her brother warring with the knowledge that his defiance could lead him down a dangerous path. Kofi, Easy's childhood friend, watched from the sidelines, his heart a mix of admiration and envy. He clapped the loudest at Easy's performances, but in the quiet of his thoughts, bitterness began to fester. Easy's shadow grows too large, he muttered to himself one evening, his mind already spinning with thoughts he dared not voice. And so, as the drums of Duru continued their steady beat, the village's story unfolded. The mountain watched, the spirits whispered, and in the hearts of its people, ambition, jealousy, and tradition collided like the rhythms of a complex song. Each beat echoing louder than the last. The village square was alive with the echo of drums, laughter, and cheer. Ease stood proudly at the center, his hands resting lightly on the drum, his heartbeat aligning with its rhythm. His performance at the festival had drawn applause like thunder from the crowd, yet Chief Ogunda's expression remained stern. As the last beat echoed into silence, Ogunda rose, his staff tapping against the earth. The crowd stilled. "Ease," he began, his voice steady but sharp, "your skill is undeniable, but your arrogance blinds you to the weight of our traditions. Ezzy's jaw tightened. But chief, he protested, why must we always stay within the boundaries of the old ways? The world changes, and we must change with it. Ogundi's eyes narrowed. Some things, he said firmly, are not meant to be changed. You came dangerously close to the forbidden drumbeat tonight. A rhythm like that is not for display. It is a summons, a call to forces far beyond your understanding. The crowd murmured uneasily. E stood, his face burning with humiliation as Ogun turned and walked away. In the days that followed, E's resentment festered like an open wound. Each glance from the villagers felt like a reminder of his public scolding. He retreated to the edge of the forest, carrying his drum and a fire of determination in his chest. If Ogundi thinks I am not worthy, he muttered to himself, I will prove him wrong. The forbidden drumbeat is not some curse, it's a challenge, and I will master it. Under the shadow of Mount Aganga, Ease began practicing rhythms he had only dared to imagine. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees leaning in as if to listen. Each beat was sharper, louder, bolder. Sweat dripped from his brow, but he felt unstoppable. One evening Adama followed the sound of the drum, her heart heavy with worry. She stepped quietly through the trees until she found Ease, his hands a blur of motion over the drum. Ezzy, she called softly. Startled, he looked up, his expression a mix of annoyance and guilt. What are you doing here? He demanded. I could ask you the same, she said, her voice trembling. Ez, you're playing with fire. You know the stories. Those who try to control the forbidden drumbeat stories, he interrupted sharply. That's all they are. Old tales meant to scare children. Adama's eyes filled with tears. And you think you're different? That you won't pay the price? She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. Please, brother, stop this before it's too late. Ease pulled away. You don't understand. I'm not like the others. I can handle this. Adama watched him, her heart breaking. She knew his ambition blinded him, but she also knew she could not stop him. Not yet. In the shadows of the forest, Kofi stood silently, his fists clenched. He had followed Ease, curious about his growing confidence. Now, as he watched Ease defy the warnings of tradition, jealousy coiled tightly around his heart. He thinks he's better than all of us, Kofi muttered to himself. Maybe it's time the village saw him for what he truly is. That night, Kofi hatched a plan. At the next festival, he would challenge Ease to play the forbidden drumbeat, disguising his malice as admiration. He smiled bitterly. Let the spirits judge him, he whispered. Strange things began to happen in the village. Livestock disappeared, their pens eerily empty. Shadows lingered in the forest long after sunset, and a heavy silence blanketed the air. The elders whispered among themselves, their faces drawn with worry. One night, Chief Ogund gathered the village council. The spirits are stirring, he said gravely. Something or someone is disrupting the balance. Adama, sitting quietly at the edge of the gathering, lowered her head. She knew what or who was causing the unrest. The next morning, she confronted her brother again. Ease, she said firmly, can't you see what's happening? The spirits are warning us. Easy's eyes flashed with frustration. You're imagining things. The spirits have nothing to do with this. Then why are the elders so worried? She shot back. Why do the trees feel heavier, the air colder? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Please, Ease. If you won't stop for the village, stop for me. For a moment Easy's resolve wavered, but then he shook his head. I can't, Adama. I won't. That evening Chief Ogund approached Ease in the square. His eyes, deep with pain, locked onto the young man. Ease, he said quietly, I know what you are doing. I know the fire in your heart, it is one I carried once, long ago. Ease frowned. What do you mean? Ogund sighed heavily. I, too, played the forbidden drumbeat when I was young. I thought I could control it. But the spirits are not to be controlled. His voice broke. I lost my son that day. The spirits took him, and I have carried that pain every day since. Ease stared at him, conflicted. Then why did they let you live? Because I was spared to warn others, Ogund replied. To keep the village safe from the mistake I made. But Ease shook his head. That was your story, Chief. It is not mine. Ogunda watched him walk away, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. The festival night arrived, and the village of Duru was alive with color and sound. The moon hung high, its silver glow illuminating the square where the drumming contest would take place. Lanterns strung between tall baobab trees flickered in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows on the crowd. Villagers wore their brightest garments, the reds and yellows swirling like fire and sun. Laughter mingled with the steady hum of excitement as children darted between the legs of the elders, who stood with arms crossed, ready to judge the performances. The air was thick with anticipation. Tonight, the finest drummers would honor their ancestors and show the village their skill. At the edge of the square, the young and ambitious Ease waited, his drum resting on his lap, his fingers tapping a rhythm against its taut surface. "It is your time, Easy," Kofi said, a sly grin playing on his lips. "Show them who you are." Ez nodded, determination glinting in his eyes. "I will." When Ease stepped onto the stage, the murmurs of the crowd fell silent. He stood tall, his presence commanding respect. The faint hum of the evening cicadas seemed to fade as all eyes fixed on him. Slowly he raised his hands and began to play. The first beats rolled out, steady and strong, like the pulse of a heartbeat. The crowd swayed to the rhythm, their feet tapping in unison. Ease's hands moved faster, weaving a melody that danced through the square, lighting up faces with awe. The elders exchanged nods of approval, their expressions softening with admiration. "Do you feel that?" whispered a young woman in the crowd to her companion. "I do," the other replied, her eyes wide. "He plays like he's calling the stars themselves." Ease's confidence grew with every cheer, every smile. But as his rhythm intensified, a new thought crept into his mind. "They think I am great now. What if they heard what I truly can do?" Without hesitation, Ease shifted the rhythm. His hands struck the drum in an unfamiliar cadence, faster and sharper than before. The crowd's movements slowed, their joy giving way to unease. The sound was different, otherworldly. It resonated in their chests, not like music, but like a call. The elders stiffened, their eyes narrowing. Chief Ogunda's hand gripped his staff tightly. "No," he muttered under his breath. He wouldn't dare. The air grew heavy, the lantern flames flickering wildly, as if fighting against a sudden wind. Shadows seemed to lengthen and twist, creeping toward the edges of the square. A child began to cry, clutching her mother's leg as the sound of Easy's drum filled the space, growing louder and louder. The first whispers came softly, carried on the breeze. They were voices low and indistinct, yet full of emotion. The crowd stilled, their unease now bordering on fear. Ease's hands faltered for a moment, but his pride pushed him forward. He struck the drum harder, and the whispers turned to moans, then to roars. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. The villagers gasped as the trees around the square began to sway, their leaves rustling like frantic whispers. From the shadows of the forest emerged figures cloaked in mist, their forms both human and otherworldly. Their eyes glowed faintly, their expressions a haunting mixture of pain and fury. The villagers screamed, some falling to their knees. "The spirits," someone cried. "He has summoned the spirits." Easy's hands trembled as the spirits approached, their gaze fixed on him. He tried to continue playing, but his rhythm faltered. The drumstick slipped from his fingers and clattered to the ground. His chest heaved as the spirits drew closer, their presence overwhelming. Chief Ogund stepped forward, his voice steady, despite the fear in his eyes. "Spirits of our ancestors," he called, "hear me. This was not done out of malice, but out of ignorance. Spare us your wrath." The spirits did not respond to Ogunda's plea. Instead, their glowing eyes turned toward Kofi, who had been watching from the shadows. "You," they spoke, their voices echoing like thunder. "You set this in motion." Kofi froze, his face pale. "No, he stammered, stepping backward. The crowd turned to him, their expressions shifting from fear to anger as the truth became clear. The spirits moved closer, their forms towering over him. "Your envy and deceit have brought us here. You sought to destroy your brother, and in doing so, you have brought chaos to your people." Kofi dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I am sorry," he cried. "I was wrong. I acted out of jealousy. Please forgive me." The spirits stared at him for a long moment before retreating, their forms dissolving into mist. The ground grew still, the lantern flames steadied, and the air became light once more. In the silence that followed, the villagers turned back to Ez, who remained frozen at the center of the square. Chief Ogund placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have much to learn, Easy," he said, his voice firm but kind. and the village will decide if you are ready to earn their trust again." Ease nodded, tears in his eyes. He looked toward Adama, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her face a mixture of relief and sadness. In that moment he realized the weight of his choices and the long road ahead to make things right. Ease stood in the center of the village square, his body trembling. The spirits, their forms shimmering and cloaked in mist, loomed before him. Their eyes, glowing with an unearthly light, bore into his soul, and the weight of their judgment pressed down on him like the heaviest drumbeat. He fell to his knees, his hands clutching the earth. "I was wrong," he cried, his voice cracking. "I was blinded by my pride, my foolishness. I thought I could master what belongs to the ancestors. I see now that I have disrespected their wisdom and the traditions that protect us." The villagers watched in silence, their faces pale with fear and awe. The only sound was Easy's ragged breathing as he knelt, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Forgive me," he pleaded, his head bowed. "Forgive my arrogance, my defiance. I offer myself to you, spirits of our ancestors. I only ask that you spare my people." The spirits did not move. Their gazes remained fixed on Ease, unblinking and stern. The air around the square felt thick, as though time itself had paused to wait for their response. Chief Ogunde stepped forward cautiously, his staff trembling in his grip. "Great spirits," he began, his voice steady but filled with reverence. "You see the boy's heart laid bare before you. He has shown humility, and he knows his wrongs. Is this not the lesson you wish to teach him?" But the spirits gave no reply. Their silence was heavier than thunder, and their forms flickered as if caught between worlds. Suddenly Adama stepped out from the crowd. Her bare feet moved quickly over the ground, her face streaked with tears. She reached Easy's side, kneeling beside him and wrapping her arms protectively around his shoulders. "Spirits of our ancestors," she began, her voice shaking but strong, "my brother has made mistakes, but his heart is not wicked. He is young and full of fire, but that fire can still light the way for others. If his life must be taken to restore balance, then take mine instead." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Ease looked up at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Adama, no," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Adama turned to him, her expression soft but resolute. "It is what must be done, Easy. You have a gift that can bring honor to our family and our village. But only if you live to learn from this." She stood and faced the spirits, her arms open wide. "I offer myself in his place," she repeated. "Spare my brother, for he has much to do. I ask only for mercy." The spirits' forms shifted, their glowing eyes flickering. For what felt like an eternity, they stood motionless, their judgment hanging heavy in the air. Then, slowly, they began to retreat. Their voices, deep and resonant, echoed through the square. "Love as pure as this restores the balance. Learn from it." Their forms dissolved into the mist, leaving the square in silence. The air lightened, and the trembling of the ground ceased. The villagers stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the spot where the spirits had disappeared. Slowly, one by one, they began to lower their heads in reverence. Ease, still kneeling, clutched his sister tightly. "Adama," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, I don't deserve your sacrifice." She smiled, wiping the tears from his face. "You will, brother, you will." In the days that followed, Ease made a decision that shocked the village. He stepped away from the drum as a performer, choosing instead to teach the younger generation. "The drum is not just a tool," he told his students. "It is a voice of the ancestors, a bridge between us and the spirits. To play it is an honor, not a right." His humility earned him the respect of the elders, who saw in him a new understanding of tradition. Chief Ogund, watching from the edge of the square one morning, nodded in approval. Kofi, too, found his path to redemption. Ashamed of his jealousy and betrayal, he began dedicating himself to the village, repairing homes, tending to the sick, and ensuring the square was always ready for gatherings. Though it took time, the villagers began to forgive him, seeing in his actions a genuine desire to atone. The story of the festival night became a tale told around the fires, a lesson for generations to come. The villagers spoke of love, humility, and the balance between ambition and tradition. One evening, under the glow of the moon, Chief Ogund stood in the square and raised his staff. "Tonight we sing for unity," he declared. The villagers joined hands, their voices lifting in a ceremonial song. Aze and Adama stood side by side, their hearts light as the drumbeat of tradition echoed once more, strong and steady, through the village of Duru.